Hello, everybody. Kathy Caprino here, and welcome to another episode of Finding Brave. Yet again, I have to pinch myself. I'm so excited to have our guest today, Ursula Jorch, who I had the pleasure of joining on your amazing podcast. And I think we had so much fun. We couldn't wait to just continue it somehow, right, Ursula? Well, I did anyway.
That's true. Absolutely true for me too. I loved hearing about your book, and we had such a good conversation.
Thank you. We did. I so enjoyed it. And today we're talking about something that is so near and dear both of our hearts. But Ursula truly is the expert here on focus your business on doing good to increase profit, which, we're going to talk all about the myths in our world that push against that, right? The biases. I think you're going to share a lot of that.
Sure.
But let's just dive right in. Let me tell you all about Ursula. Ursula Jorch is a business coach, speaker, and podcast host who shows women leaders how to turn their businesses into profitable agents for lasting change, global impact, and a force for good in the world. Find Ursula at workalchemy.com along with free resources for you and your business. Do not miss this. And listen to her. It's a fantastic podcast, truly. Work Alchemy, the impact interviews with guests as diverse as Seth Godin and Marianne Williamson. Wow.
Yeah, that's Kathy Caprino.
And Kathy Caprino. Wow. I'm in good company there. All right. Let us dig in, Ursula. I have to tell you, guests fill out this prep sheet of mine, and they always put in some bullet points they want to make sure people understand. And for the first time last week, I said, why don't I read these bullet points so we make sure those takeaways are really going to be taken away, and then we're going to riff on those if I could do that.
Sounds great.
So, number one, impact is where you and your unique business meet the world and contribute to making it better for all of us. Number two, when you focus on impact throughout your business, your revenue and profit grow. And number three, impactful leadership is necessary for impact. Wow. I got to love that. Now, let's talk about, first of all, how did you get into this, Ursula, that you are focused on impact? I have a feeling that maybe there wasn't impact in your life before and you wanted to turn that around. Is that right or no?
Yeah, well, I think I've always leaned that way. I've always had an interest in that way. Right from the beginning I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years now. So from the start, even before that, when I had a corporate job, I was in academia prior to that. I've always been looking towards how can I help? How can I do some good in the world? And my focus got very refined, I guess, into this realm about 10 years ago when I'd been operating my business for about 15 years, and I was really things were humming along, going well, and I just was feeling very restless. And what I ended up doing through a whole series of explorations, I started exhibiting my photography. I was doing some music performance, and it still kind of wasn't so satisfying. So what I ended up doing was I thought, well, I'll take some time off. And most entrepreneurs, 2 weeks is like a huge time frame.
Scary.
And exactly. Yeah. You're afraid that your clients won't be there when you get back, or something will happen. But that kept growing. It was 3 weeks, and then a month, 6 weeks. Well, what I ended up doing was selling my house and everything I owned. And I went on the road for a year and traveled. And my plan was just, I'll travel as long as that makes sense. And then I thought I would just pick up and carry on after that. But what happened during that year was really that I got very clear about the fact that something I'd been doing all along, which was coaching people, because my clients would say, I'd go into a corporate setting and they'd say, I love that your business is doing so well. How do I do that? How do I move out?
They wanted to leave corporate?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
So I realized that was really where I wanted to focus. And this focus on impact got more and more central to what I was doing, because it became really important to me to do good with business rather than just churning out profits. And lovely as that is, and necessary as that is, because a business without profit is a hobby, essentially. I really developed more of an interest starting getting involved in B Corps and conscious capitalism and those as movements, and just really got clear on the fact that that is what I wanted to contribute to, because there's so many things that we're called on to affect in the world, we can affect as entrepreneurs and leaders. And I really wanted to be part of that and helping people to do that.
What an
So,
inspiring story, Ursula. So as I'm sitting here listening, can you do this for us? Can you define what impact is? Because I think
sure.
already people are listening saying, yeah, I want that. And maybe I'm even doing that, or maybe I'm not doing that. How do you define impact?
Well, that really was one of the key points, the bullet points that you read. To me, impact is where you and your unique business meet the world and contribute to making it better for all of us. So to me, there's a real interplay, a harmony between those. So you and your business on one hand, and the contribution you're making on the other. And you can't have one without the other in terms of impact. So if you're always focused on you and your business, you can get very insular, very profit only focused, but you're not contributing that much. And if you're focusing only on contribution, you get burned out.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Can I ask you this? I'm guessing, and you know more about this than I, but I'm guessing that almost every single business that's created, the founder thinks they're making an impact of sorts. Like this new, what comes to mind is Bombas with the socks. And
Right.
I've interviewed them. They are making an enormous impact. And, the reason was the founder saw an ad, I think, on television that the most needed item was socks in homeless shelters. Wow. And he said, I'm doing it. He and the co-founder.
Yeah.
But don't you think that probably every business, even Pepsi, Coke, Campbell's Soup, whatever it is, thinks I'm helping in some way? So can you give us the real scoop on what you think the difference is? Maybe not every organization is making impact that they dream to make. What is it? What does impact look like?
Well, it's a great question, Kathy, and I think you'd be surprised. I mean, there's really a very broad spectrum. I think there are people that start companies because they want to make money in some way, and they see an opportunity to do that, and they don't really think about it
And they
beyond
don't really
that.
care what the outcome is? Like, let
Well,
me sell widgets and I don't give a hoot about widgets,
yeah, I
but
think
there's a
there are
need for
folks
widgets.
who, yeah, I think there's a folks who see a business opportunity and don't necessarily look at it in the context of what they could be contributing with it.
Really?
And that's not necessarily an
Imagine.
indictment of, I know. It's not necessarily an indictment of them as people. I think that we've gotten into this habit of looking at business as a profit machine. And then that becomes a way to do other things. So they're using their business in order to do some other things they want to do in the world. And I think people, further along the spectrum, I think there are people who think, well, I'm giving people jobs, or
Right.
I'm helping other companies do whatever they do. And then, as you move further along the spectrum, at the opposite end of, I only care about profits, the opposite end of that is, I want to really make a difference in the world. And those are more the social enterprises. But even there's a spectrum of companies don't have to be social enterprises in order to make an impact.
Right.
They really can be focused on doing good in the world that exceeds, simply, I'm going to give some money to charity. There's a whole spectrum of things you can do before you, go the whole route.
What a fascinating line of work you're in. I keep harping on this one thing because it really bothers me. I'd love to know your thoughts. I can't use his name, but there's a huge, multi-millionaire entrepreneur who has said, I saw a video of him saying this: if you really want to be wealthy or be successful, forget passion.
Yes.
And he said, do what you're good at. And literally, like, my head exploded. I so don't agree with that. And can I talk about it and hear your thoughts? Because
please
I'm
do.
desperate to. I think that in our culture, in the American culture, there's this myth that if you pursue something you're passionate about, you're going to go broke and live on a van on the side of the road, as Saturday Night
Starving
Live
artist or
skit has.
Right.
I don't understand this myth, but to me, to do only what you're good at when there's no connection in your heart and soul to it, zero connection. And I don't mean that, for instance, my son is a financial analyst. There's passion there for it. He loves it. He loves the numbers. He loves, so I don't mean we all have to be moving mountains and changing, the world in an enormous way. But I don't understand this idea that it's one or the other, that if you're passionate, you're going to go broke, your company's going to go broke. Where did we get it? And why do people have, and I need to say one other thing. In working with so many women who are in the corporate world just doing what they're good at, the problem is many of them in a patriarchal world are not advancing the way they deserve.
Sure.
So, they're not getting that benefit of, I'm just doing what I'm good at. Can you talk about that? Do you see this constant strain between, you're just that thing is just gonna make you go broke in 2 seconds? Is this it? Do you feel there's a myth in our world about this?
Yeah, well, I love to talk to you about that. It's really, I think that whole thing about do what you love, the money will follow. There is an essence of truth in it. And in order to run a business, to be an entrepreneur, there's work involved.
Right.
There are a lot of practical things that you have to do. And it's not necessarily that you're not inspired to do it, but it still has to get done. So I think the very extreme end of that is, I'm just going to sit back here in my Barca lounger and, awesome things
my
will happen.
bonbons on my couch. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
people, I do want to say, I've often said, do what you love and the money will follow is a really dangerous thought, because often it doesn't.
Yeah.
So the idea that I'm going to make a lot of money because I love what I do is erroneous.
I agree.
You got to be a good business person. You've got to fill a need in the market, and you have to know how to fill that need and produce. Right. So I am not, Pollyanna. Woohoo!
Right.
Do what you love. You've got to be smart and be a business person and a very savvy in every way.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that whole passion element that you started off with is really important, in the sense that you have to feel good about what you're doing. You have to have energy about what you're offering people in a business setting, or you just don't have the stamina and the sustainability to be able to move forward with it. There has to be some element of passion in it. But I agree that sort of all or nothing, have passion and just sit and wait for things to happen, isn't going to work.
Or have passion and you'll go broke,
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think too that it's folks that go into something because it seems like the practical thing to do. I always feel a bit sad about it. I talked to someone recently who'd been a professional his entire life, and we were talking about what I do, and I talked about how much I loved it and why I found it so energizing. And he said, I've always really hated what I've done. And he's had a successful career doing this work. And he was just dying to retire. Like the moment he could, he was out the door. And that to me it feels so unfortunate, because we spend so much time in work. How can we make it something where we can do multiple things? We can make some money, be passionate about it, contribute in some way. To me, that's the tremendous dynamic combination that I always go for.
Let me say this. My world is helping people, who come and in some way their career is not what they want it to be. They want more, different, or better. And often they don't know which one. But, having had my own corporate career for 18 years, and I do want to highlight this. I never felt in the last 2 years, it was horrific. I felt so misaligned value-wise with what we were doing. And one reason was we were selling membership programs, auto, like a AAA kind of thing, or a family entertainment thing. And I was head of the product. And so I oversaw marketing, and they sent me to the telemarketing center where we were back then. The marketing teams were pitching it on the phone to people. And I remember somebody saying, I'm listening in, I don't have the money for this program, but because you're having a sweepstakes, I'm going to sign up, and I can't even afford the electricity. They were living in I guess you'd call it a trailer park, but they couldn't afford their electricity, but they said they were going to sign up for this thing to get the sweepstakes. I took up the earphone and went, I can't do this 1 minute more. But I'd look around and everyone else was perfectly fine. They didn't even register that comment. They thought, bing, another sale. So I think part of this is also what you're focused on needs to align with your values.
I completely agree.
This poor fellow there's functionally not liking what you do. And then there's, I like finance or I like marketing, but not this, not for this cause. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, a chunk of the work that I do with people is really getting very clear about what their values are. And a lot of people have done this in their own sort of professional development. But I think we have to take that a step further. That I completely agree with you that if it's not aligned with your values, you're not going to feel good about it. You're going to have this constant dissonance, which interferes with your ability to focus and move through challenges and really get things done. But I think there's also another level of examination, and this is something that I do with clients. I think sometimes we grow up in a culture or we are educated in a culture where we adopt certain values that are part of the larger culture, but we ourselves haven't really thought about, is this really what I believe? Is this really what I am willing to take action on, even when things get challenging? And I think that's where people can run into trouble. They've kind of adopted things that aren't their own. So what I think is really important is to go into what is it that you are actually willing to take action on and willing to go through whatever fire there is around taking action on that. So you can say, well, I value integrity, but if you come to a point where, like, to take your example of the telemarketer of hearing, I can't afford this, I can't even pay my electricity, but I will buy this. If it's a moment of decision. And if you can hold those values really high, you can remain aligned and you can say things like, I don't think this is right for you. Come back to us when, you're ready to move forward, or how can I help you in your situation, or any number of things. But I think I call those pull priorities, those values that really come from within that draw you forward. And
that's so beautiful, Ursula. And I think that those change sometimes over time. I think at age 28, if I had heard the telemarketer pitching that, I don't know that I would have felt so, I think age changes things, experience behind the eyeballs, wisdom behind the eyeballs. And
well, you start to think about your legacy and what are you leaving behind and what kind of effect are you having?
Right.
And that's
all right. Now tell us, people came here because they're also interested in the profit piece.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, all right, here's the question. My business, it matters to me. I think I'm making a difference, but I'm not making a living. We're not making a living. How do people increase their profit when they're doing good? What do you look at first, Ursula? I'm sure you do a whole diagnosis on a business, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the same principles that apply to any business apply to, in fact, impactful businesses too, ones that want to do good in the world. So having a solid business model, being able to have offerings that your audience wants, being really clear about your offerings and talking to them, and then being able to close a sale. I mean, those basic sort of business skills are all part of having a business that has impact. And it's also true that that focus on profit that we touched on earlier is not necessarily going to drive you to doing well in a business. If you have clarity about the impact you want to have, studies have shown, comparing businesses that are only profit focused versus those that are impact focused, the ones that are impact focused actually make 12 to 14 times more revenue.
Wow.
And depending on the study, between 2 and 50 times, 50 times more profit, which
Wow.
I find kind of shocking. I mean, I read it and I thought, okay, this is an outlier scenario, but there's some really solid evidence for that, that when you are motivated by having impact, making a difference in the lives of your customers and clients and those affected by them, then you can really, it really ramps up your revenue as well. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense in the sense that if you're focused on impact, if you're focused on doing good, then you're going to look at your customers a little differently. You're going to think about it in terms of what can I do to help them, instead of having something that you know will sell and then just blinkered
Hammering it
pushing
down.
that.
Right.
Right.
All right. Questions.
Yeah.
We didn't prep this. So if this is difficult to answer, let me know. What do you think the top 3 things that are going wrong in businesses, profit wise? What do you think the top 3 mistakes are? Let me start this off. I remember when I was managing a $30 million budget, and this was a job I didn't like, and the products I didn't like. But I remember I was a vice president. The senior vice president said to his team, "Look, people, we're going over this P&L, and what I need you to do is act like it's your own money, and you're not. When I ask you, this list line item, what goes into that? Why are we, over 30% over last year?"
Right.
And I'm looking at him like not knowing. And I remember hearing those words, act like it's your own money, but I didn't know what that meant. Now, for instance, I am scrutinizing every expense.
Right. You're an entrepreneur. So
I'm an entrepreneur. It used to be, okay, sure, let's spend that. Let's spend, massive amounts on my hosting for my 3 websites, et cetera. Now, I mean, one might call it nickel and diming, but, and I even see that among the people that work with me very closely, they don't have that same feeling that I'm not going to waste a penny, because every penny that I waste is less money I can turn into a product or a service. So you need to manage it like your life depends on it. So that's one thing I see that a lot of entrepreneurs don't know how to do. Would you agree with that? And can you give us 3 more things that entrepreneurs are not doing, which is sucking the profit out?
I think there's a learning curve. I think that when you first start, you're so energized by the idea. And if you don't have a business background or an extensive one, and I found even my corporate background was helpful, although the attitude is very different. It's true.
Right.
It's not your
helpful
own
to a
money.
point, but
Right.
it ain't the same, is it? Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think you definitely, there's a learning curve about when you have some months where you suddenly see, oh, wow, my profit has really gone down here. I think keeping on top of that, tracking it on a regular basis is so crucial. It's sometimes something that people don't even want to look at. It's like, finances, I don't want to do it. But you're really doing your business and your impact a disservice if you're not keeping an eye on the profit margin and really making sure that you're not spending money where it doesn't need to be spent. And sometimes you don't know the answer to, does it need to be spent here, until you try it out. So it's good to be experimental rather than going whole hog. Just go into it with the attitude of, well, this seems reasonable to do right now. Let's try it out and see, and track data and keep analyzing what it is that's happening. And it's not my favorite thing to do. I mean, I have some math in my background, but even I don't enjoy it that much. But if you don't do it, your business can really falter, and it just collapses under the weight of bad money management. The other thing too is, if you're not managing your finances in that way, your impact decreases, because as things start to go downhill, your focus is taken away from impact and larger issues, and it gets more and more focused on money because you have to in order to survive.
Desperate.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it. There's another thing, the flip side of it. So they're spending too much or not looking at, and one thing I'd love to add, I'm not a mathematician. I don't enjoy math, but I enjoy research. I've been a researcher. So if you can look at your numbers as what is the story that's being told, I think it makes it more palatable,
Yeah.
less intimidating. A
No,
lot of
that's a
women
great
I work with
attitude.
say, I hate numbers. Okay, look at it
Right.
as research. But the flip side of that, and I'd love your thoughts, I think that the women uh, I've worked with, and I do want to say I interviewed Susan, I think her name is pronounced Sabat, and she was the head of Amex Open, for entrepreneurs. And
Yeah.
I asked her, this is quite some time ago, what are the difference between male and female entrepreneurs? And she
Right.
whipped it off. Number one, that women tend to be very uncomfortable with the numbers. So if you ask them and they're running the business, they'll say, I have someone else do that. Whereas the man will typically fire off the numbers. Number two, when you ask a woman, do you think you can scale this? They often say, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The guy says, yeah, 100%.
Right.
And the third thing I remember clearly is, why did you start this business? The man says to make money. The female says to make a difference, to do something I'm passionate about.
Interesting.
And yeah, fascinating. But one thing I see with the women I work with, there's an incredible, I call it perfectionistic overfunctioning, doing more than is appropriate, necessary, and healthy. And what it
Yeah.
also means is you will not delegate.
Yeah.
You won't hire. Do you see that?
I do. And that one I think applies to men as well. And I agree with you. The way you describe perfectionistic overfunctioning in your book, which I thought was a great thing to look at. And I certainly recognize myself in that,
Me too.
in that, but I think that issue of scaling requires you to delegate. There's no way that you can scale and increase the size of your business beyond a certain point if you're not willing to allow responsibility and creativity and innovation from other people to influence you as you're developing your business. And in some ways, I think there's different aspects of that. I think it depends somewhat on personality, but I think also a founder is someone who has the idea, they nurture it along, and it's difficult to let it go. And
Really true.
yeah, I think to some extent, men and women have a similar issue in that regard. But I think also men tend to, there have been studies done, they tend to overestimate or be able to really see themselves in a much more positive light than women sometimes do. So women are more cautious and less likely to sort of say, I want to start a $10 million company. It's if it happens and they start to see opportunity and they develop more confidence in being able to talk that way. But yeah, in my experience, male entrepreneurs are more likely to say, yeah, that's my goal. And I think there's some cultural pressure on them. It's like, well, I just want to have a lifestyle business where I make a couple of $100,000 a year and my family's comfortable. And it's not a cool thing for a guy to say. And I think
right,
women,
Ursula.
it's more acceptable to say, well, I just want to, bring in this income, and it may be supplemental or something that they're doing solo. But
I think you're so right. As I was interviewing entrepreneurs, and Mike Michalowicz is someone who I've interviewed many times, and I think the world of him. I think I was speaking with him. I don't think he said it, but I started to see that among the world of entrepreneurs, and I think it's still a male, especially in the tech world, but it's still, patriarchal, male dominated. I started getting the feeling that if your business wasn't making over $1 million, it's a nothing in people's minds.
There's certainly that attitude.
There's that attitude.
But something to keep in mind, and this is something that I'm so interested in shifting in, is that venture capital money, which is the source of a lot of scaling funding, women and minorities get 2% of all venture capital provided in the United States, 2%. And I find that this is not an ancient statistic. This is a 2018 number.
2%.
And I find that profoundly shocking.
And I think there are so many influences. I think, not to blame the victim, but I think many women find it extremely hard to make a pitch, to ask for what they've they're questioning if they deserve. Number two, they're not in the right ecosystem,
Right.
meaning we can't get into that ecosystem often,
I think that's actually a big player in it, in the sense of, I mean, I've been involved in some venture capital work, and seeing how startups get funding. And I've done a lot of mentoring in that realm. And what I keep seeing over and over again is that there's a collegiality, which you know from your corporate setting. It's like, I know this person, they're like me, therefore I'm more likely to give them the leeway that would mean that I'm willing to fund this. And part of that, gender still goes along with that, unfortunately. So most venture capitalists are male. And I think that's why it's really important. And we're seeing this more and more, that we're seeing more and more women getting involved in venture capital groups and angel funding, and really being part of being able to bring more funding to women and minority businesses.
That's right.
So,
I love your perspective. I do want to suggest my friend and a high-level sponsor of mine, Judy Robinette, has written an incredible book, Crack the Funding Code. And it's all about, for women, how you get that funding that you deserve. So we'll link to that. I'm aware of our time, but can I ask you one other question, Ursula?
Yeah, please do.
You talk about impact starts with impactful leadership. I don't know if you put it that way, but can you describe what we have to do? Someone's listening here and they're like, yes, I want to be that. What do I have to do differently? What is an impactful leader, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the way I break this down is really into 6 skills that are developed by impactful leaders. And the first one is self-awareness. They've got to be able to know themselves, know how they're going to respond, and therefore make actual conscious decisions about how they're going to show up. That's super important. The second one is vision, and that won't surprise anyone, to have the idea and be able to put energy behind it and make it become vivid for the people that they work with, whether it's their team or even clients and their partners. This is a really important aspect. The third is focus. You've got to be able to stay with it, stay the course, have the tenacity to kind of stay with it. And that brings me to the fourth one, which is resilience and perseverance. So you're going to inevitably bump up against challenges and difficulties. Things are going to happen that you wish hadn't. And to be able to bounce back from that and be able to have the clarity around if you're getting pushback is important, and the perseverance to stay with it and to really work through things. The fifth one, and this one maybe we don't think about very often around leadership, and that is loving kindness. I think is super important. I think that it's a word from Buddhist philosophy. It also appears in some biblical texts, so it's kind of a universal spiritual tenet. But I think treating people with compassion and kindness is incredibly important to being an impactful leader. As a leader, you have to be able to bring people along with you, and to have impact as a leader, no one has impact alone, and you really need to be able to deal with people in a way where they're willing to be part of what you're offering, and being caring in that is a big part of it. And the final one is a commitment to growth. I think that impactful leaders are deeply committed to growing themselves. They're always into personal development and doing that in a way that's really going to allow them to contribute more and to be more present. Servant leadership is something that often comes up as something that's a part of that, being able to understand how you can serve and contribute, and learning is a huge part of that, and learning from mistakes as well, because inevitably you do something that you realize in retrospect was not ideal.
Not my best moment.
Right, exactly. So how do you recover?
Wow, I love these. Do you know that they really marry up with, I just wrote a piece, 9 essential behaviors of people who positively impact the world. And
great.
So much of them, we'll link to that, so much of them line up. I want to highlight 2 things, and then I want to ask where people can learn about you. One blind spot that I've lived, or one issue about self-awareness, we're blind in some ways to, on the one hand, some of our amazing gifts where someone else can say, wow, you really have this gift. But we're also somewhat blind to our own blind spots of how we think it has to be. And I'm happy to get into that if anyone's interested later. I've had blind spots in my own business that has kept it not scaling.
Well, we all do. Yeah.
And so this self-awareness is also getting help to be more self-aware. Einstein said you can't solve a problem on the level of consciousness that created it. Get some help, right? Yeah. And the final thing I want to say is loving kindness. There's narcissists aplenty who are making a lot of money.
Right.
The thing is, it won't last. It never can last. That kind of tearing people down and eroding people's self-esteem and confidence and mental health. You might make some inroads, but it can't be sustainable. It won't be.
I agree.
And I think we're seeing that all around us right now. Do you
absolutely
agree?
Yeah, it narrows the impact you can have in a very specific way. And it's only with that broader perspective of we're all connected, we're all part of something bigger. I think that's where the maximum impact lies. So
what a way to end this. That's so beautiful, Ursula. Thank you. Now, where do people get everything they can from you? Where do we send them?
My pleasure, Kathy. You can find me at workalchemy.com. There's some resources there. The podcast link is there. There's over 200 conversations, including my conversation with you. So there's many resources there. And if you're interested in doing a business impact assessment, there's a link that Kathy has that you can work on your impact and get a sense of what that could be for you.
Oh my gosh, I love it. All right, people, if you're, you okay, Ursula? Yeah. If you're not inspired, my hands throw up in the air, but here's what I'd say. If you're starting a business, you have a small business, you want to be an entrepreneur, any of it, reach out to Ursula. Listen to this podcast and take advantage of all her free resources. And this business assessment sounds like a fantastic idea. Thanks you again. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's been great talking with you.
Come back again soon.
Well, I'd love to.
All right, everybody. I hope you're inspired and motivated. I know it can be a rough road, but it's an amazingly rewarding one. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.